Should you upgrade your CPU or your GPU? And that's a question I've always asked when I first started to build my own PC. And now that I've done it, and that I've had built a ton of PCs, well, not a ton, but my friends and my own PCs, I can arguably say that I kind of know what I'm talking about when it comes to building a good PC and what it should be meant for. A GPU and a CPU, it's a little bit convoluted for a beginner to understand what they do and how they work together. When I first started, and I think a lot of people still think this way, is that the GPU is the one that's gonna get you the most amount of frames possible on any game you play. And you can actually just cheap out on the CPU because the GPU is gonna do most of the heavy lift, which is what I thought, and that is completely wrong. And I think honestly, when I first started building my computer, I kind of wish I did the opposite. I kind of wish I spent more on the CPU than the GPU, because the GPU in my case was actually what I didn't need to upgrade because of the person that I am, the games that I play, and the things I use it for. So back to the question, what you should upgrade, it actually really depends on you. And I'm gonna talk about some factors, and the three main factors that decide, at least in my opinion, whether you should upgrade your GPU, CPU. So in my opinion, I think there are three main factors that decide whether you upgrade your CPU or GPU. And it comes down to your monitor, whether it's the resolution or refresh rate, the games that you want to play on the monitor, which is, I'm gonna assume, because you click on the gaming channel-ish, that we're talking about gaming. And then the third thing is literally anything else, and that's when it's gonna decide what you should upgrade, your CPU or GPU. So let's talk about the first thing first, which is your monitor. If you guys don't know, on this channel, I literally have talked about monitors that I've been using. I'm using a 1440p monitor right here, and I've been using a 1440p monitor, as you can see in my other video. It's pretty more of my popular videos. Monitor resolution is a big thing when it comes to deciding which graphics card to get. Most people know that a 60 series card is more or less for 1080p, 70 series is more for 1440p, and the 80 series is tending to be the 4K gaming machine. And then the 90 is just kind of overkill. But if you looked at my last video when I talked about 1440p, I actually talked about how 1440p isn't actually super hard to run compared to 1080p. It is hard to run, it is, but it's not horribly hard to run. I don't think upgrading your GPU is a necessary thing if you're upgrading from 1080 to 1440p. If you're just going for 60 FPS gameplay. However, if you're going for anything higher in terms of frame rate, if you want to go like 144 and 1440p, 240 hertz at 1440p, then it's probably best that you upgrade your GPU more than your CPU, because your GPU is going to mainly take the load on a game that is, you know, wanting to be higher refresh rate as well as on a higher graphical level in resolution. I don't know if I'm saying the right words, but that's just what I'm saying. However, if you're just straight up going 4K all the way, no matter what, 4K 60, 4K high refresh rate, go on to upgrade your GPU to the 9080 series. I think those are what you want to get. I know AMD has a lot of different options, and I think the 9070 XT is not really meant to be a 4K gaming card, but I'm pretty sure you can kind of tweak the settings to make sure you can run 4K 60 on some specific titles. However, if you're going for the 1440p, 1080p landscape, I think the AMD 9070 XT and honestly a 5070 or 5070 Ti are good options. A 5080 is the only reason you'd go for a 5080 is if you're going for a high refresh rate gaming at 1440p or 1080p. Those are the only reasons you go for a 5080 if you're going for really, really high refresh rate gaming. However, as I said, if you're jumping from 1080 to 1440p with absolutely no changes, I don't think your graphics card needs that much of an increase. So basically for resolutions, if you're playing 4K, just upgrade your GPU. You kind of have to. However, if you're going from 1080p to 1440p and you're just playing one of those resolutions, I don't think a graphics card is the most necessary thing for you to get. Unless, again, you want to get high refresh rate gaming, then a graphics card is most likely needed to hit those frame rates, especially if you're getting it at 1440p. But before we start saying that as a finalization, we need to talk about the second thing, which is the games you play. And this is the one that I feel like I needed to know a lot more about when I decided what GPU and CPU I was gonna get. If you guys don't know, a lot of my older videos and some of my current videos actually are about Marvel Rivals and just playing a lot of competitive FPSs in general. Actually, this account was created to just make Apex videos. And I love playing competitive FPS games. And I always thought that getting a 4080 would be the best thing for me, and I could run it with just like a really shit like i7 and consider that, you know, at least I got a 4080 in there or something, and then it would run perfectly fine, because you know what, 4080 is crazy good. Therefore it's gonna produce all the power, which is completely fucking wrong. I'm gonna say this in a very layman's terms. If you play competitive games, esport games, Valorant, Apex, League of Legends, all of those types of games where it's literally like competitive games, which are really, really easy to run games, especially since most people turn off all the competitive settings, such as like Overwatch, you know, you just go 0 settings. You wanna put the lowest settings possible. Straight up, your best bet on the highest FPS possible is actually upgrading your current CPU to the best CPU you can get. because of the fact that you are lowering all these settings, and the games in general are not very GPU bound because they want to have the most FPS out of these titles. Like Valorant, you can easily get like 600 FPS on Valorant. Most people are always maxing out Apex's FPS. It's like really easy to if you have a good enough CPU and GPU combo. If League of Legends can run on anything, you know it's not a GPU based game. And for the fact that you're lowering all the settings in the game on the graphics card, just the lowest settings, you're taking away a lot of load from the GPU, just put it on the CPU, and the CPU is actually the bottleneck of the system. So it's more likely the CPU is just gonna be really, really strained if it's a really shit CPU. Personally speaking, I was using an i5 12600 KF paired it with the 3070 Ti. For the most amount of time, I thought the 3070 Ti was an okay card. It wasn't a great amount of experience I having with it. You know, it kind of pushed really good 240 hertz for most of my games, but I really couldn't do anything more than that. However, in the middle of upgrading my computer system, I was switching from the Intel processor to an AMD 9800 X3D, and holy shit, I could tell the difference immediately. My frames in Valorant went from about 200-ish to about 500 to 600. It was actually insane how much that changed. Apex, I went from about hitting 240 all the time to maxing out at 300 all the time. It actually was insane how easy it was to hit it as soon as you did that. Because you realize that, wow, I'm putting all these games on low settings. The GPU is just not being maxed out at all in any capacity, so that's why. And even Marvel Rivals, which I do think is more GPU based than CPU based because of the Unreal Engine 5, I do think that the biggest upgrade I did was my CPU, then not my GPU. I did upgrade my GPU from a 3070 to a 5080, but I think the jump, I really do think the jump from an i5 to a 9800 XT was incrementally better because I was getting about 144 FPS with my current setup, which has a 3070 Ti, which is still a really capable card. And then as soon as I put the AMD processors in it, I was getting 240 FPS on Marvel Rivals, almost 240 FPS, just because I switched my processor. And when I did upgrade my GPU, I think I only gained maybe another 40 frames per second. And that's what I mean when it comes to competitive games. I think you're better off upgrading your CPU. A good CPU can max out the GPU, but a good GPU can't max out the CPU. At least that's how I like to think of it. So now we talk about the other type of game, which is, you know, single player, really, really big, graphically intensive games. Like, for example, I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 because I got Xbox Game Pass recently. It looked insanely good and it runs really, really well. And I know for a fact that the reason it's running really well is not because of the CPU, is because I'm putting a lot of strain on the GPU. I turn all the settings high, I turn on ray tracing, whatever I want to do, I'm putting it all on the GPU, I'm testing it out, I'm putting it to its limits. That way I know that the GPU is being used, the CPU, and the CPU runs fine. Because for games like Call of Duty, for all these single player games where a lot of it, where it's literally all about looks, graphics card, more important. Because you're not trying to produce the most amount of frames possible, you're trying to produce the most nice frames possible. And for the most part, for those graphically intensive games, you want to put on higher settings and a CPU will not change how well it runs. So at the end of the day, if you do play those type of single player games where you just want to see like the whole world, be immersed in the world, high graphically intensive games, especially when you pair it up with high resolution monitors, upgrading your GPU is the best bet for your gaming experience. However, now I want to talk about the last thing, which is literally to do with anything else. And I have to say this includes photo editing, this includes video editing, this includes literally everything else. I have to say, in my experience of upgrading both parts, the CPU is something that is just a lot better to upgrade. The snappiness of the system, the overall responsiveness of the system does not change with the GPU. It 100% changes when you upgrade your CPU because the CPU is the brain of the computer. It knows how to move shit really quickly. The GPU just displays it. It doesn't produce any frames when you're just trying to, you know, use your fucking mouse and scroll across a Google Doc or load a web page or open an app. The GPU doesn't do that. However, you do photos and video editing, you kind of do need a good GPU. However, I still think that a good CPU cannot be skipped. I think in tandem, those things have to go well in order to do that properly. However, I think in my overall experience, the CPU for literally any multimedia tasking, and overall productivity is just a lot better when you have a better CPU. It's a snappier and more responsive system, one that I wouldn't regret, especially when you pair it up with the SSD. Very, very nice to have a good CPU. So the TLDR is, if you're going for the graphic stuff and you want graphically intensive games and you want to put your computer through fucking hell, upgrade your GPU. But if you're doing any normal work and your work is your most priority, as well as you just play a lot of competitive FPS games, I would just go for a better CPU and maybe get a pretty decent GPU, maybe a 60, 70, I would say 70 series card, and it will feel amazing compared to having a really shit CPU with a 5080. It would feel a much better experience when you have a better CPU. Because again, as I said, a CPU can max out the GPU. A good CPU can max out the GPU, but a good GPU cannot max out the CPU. Well, at least that's how I would describe it. I know it's not maybe the most technical terms, but that's how I feel about it. Overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's been a while since my last video because I'm in the middle of an internship and it was my birthday and I have an exam to study for. A lot of things happening this summer, so I was a little bit behind the videos. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like and follow for more.